Forget the neat idea that armies issued winter gear, and the problem was solved. Outside Leningrad from late 1941 into 1942, cold attacked fingers, feet, and judgment. Cloth froze stiff. Metal bit skin. Soldiers cut corners because rules didn't stop frostbite. Lend-Lease didn't arrive as a magic box either. It arrived as odd pieces, mismatched sizes, and unfamiliar kit then got reinterpreted at the front. What mattered wasn't origin, it was function. These are the 7 hidden British cold weather gear hacks in the Siege of Leningrad. Number 7. British windproof smocks. Covert comfort during the cold siege. Officially, a smock was outer clothing, not a sleeping system and not a substitute for a proper greatcoat. Soviet winter tables emphasized layered wool, padded telegraphic jackets, and standard issue gear controlled through supply channels. Anything foreign was supposed to be inventoried, issued by order, and kept uniform inside a unit. Reality was messier. Windproof smocks of the British, windproof, type made for cold, wet conditions and originally associated with British raiding and commando-styled troops show up in Lend-Lease clothing flows as the war went on, even if the paper trail at Leningrad is thinner than people claim. When one did appear near the front, men treated it like a tool, not a symbol. Worn over quilted jackets, cinched tight at the waist, hood up under a steel helmet. Some cut the hem shorter to stop it snagging in trenches or while hauling sleds. When it worked, the payoff was simple. Less wind-driven heat loss on sentry duty, and fewer numb hands when you still had to operate a bolt in safety. When it failed quietly. Cotton that iced up, a wet smock that stole heat faster than it saved, and a useful garment that vanished into the informal economy the moment rations ran short. Number 6. Shearling-lined flying boots. Forbidden footwear on frozen ground. Flying boots were meant for altitude and aircraft cabins, not for marching on ice. In most armies, specialty kit was controlled for a reason. Aircrew equipment was supposed to stay with aircrew, and heavy insulated boots could be a liability, clumsy, slow to dry, and hard to repair in the field. But around besieged Leningrad, infantry problems didn't ask permission. You stood still for hours. You moved by foot, often over compacted snow and rubble. If a pair of shearling-lined flying boots surfaced through salvage, transfer, or simple theft, men tried them on and made the calculation. Some wrapped the soles with cord or strips of fabric for traction. Others stuffed paper or extra felt inside to reduce slop and stop blisters. If the boots were too large, they became a shared asset. One sentry shift, then passed to the next. The success case was obvious. Warm feet meant fewer frostbite casualties and fewer men pulled off the line. The failure case was just as real. Bulky boots could slow you in a sprint during shelling, and wet shearling turned into a cold sponge. A boot that saved toes one day could cripple a march the next. Number 5. Wool balaclavas and helmet liners. Secret headwear in a war of frost. On paper, headgear was regulated for identification and uniformity. Helmets were worn as issued. Liners were not supposed to compromise fit or hearing, and anything that interfered with the helmet's seating or the use of gas masks was discouraged. Warmth mattered, but so did discipline and standardization. In practice, cold forced trade-offs. Wool balaclavas and improvised liners, whether Soviet-made, civilian-knitted, or plausibly arriving through Allied supply alongside other winter clothing, were used because exposed skin was a medical problem, not a morale issue. Men layered a thin wool cap under the SSH-40 or earlier helmets, then added scarf material around the neck seal. Some cut eye and mouth openings wider to prevent freezing breath from soaking the fabric. Others stitched in extra flaps to protect ears without blocking the helmet strap. When it worked, it kept men functional. You could stay on observation longer and still speak clearly enough to pass a fire order. When it backfired, it muffled sound and trapped sweat. That could mean missing the scrape of boots in snow or taking off your helmet, just for a second, because the itch and heat felt unbearable. Number 4. Mittens and trigger finger gloves. Prohibited protection for precision and warmth. Winter doctrine always collided with weapons handling. Thick mittens kept hands alive but made it harder to reload, set a safety, or feel a trigger break. Many regulations and training norms pushed gloves that preserved dexterity, or simply expected men to bear a hand briefly when firing and servicing weapons. At Leningrad's temperature swings, that expectation could be a trap. Soldiers used mitten systems, sometimes with a trigger finger split, sometimes with a removable flap, because frostbite didn't care about marksmanship theory. If British patterned cold weather gloves or mittens appeared through supply channels, they'd be adopted fast, but just as often men copied the idea with local materials. Wool inner gloves under oversized mittens, a slit sewn for the index finger, cords tied to sleeves so the mittens couldn't be dropped in a scramble. Some even enlarged trigger guards on submachine guns with field expedient filing to accommodate bulkier gloves. The win was fewer frozen fingers and more soldiers still able to fire on day 3 of a cold snap. The loss was accidental discharges and fumbled reloads when fabric snagged a trigger. If you had to choose warmth or perfect dexterity, which keeps you alive longer? Before we move on, look at the trade-offs so far. Every hack solves one problem and creates another. Traction versus speed, warmth versus hearing, mittens versus a clean trigger pull. Tell us which compromise you'd make. And subscribe before we get into the top 3. Number 3. Solid fuel pocket stoves and heat tablets. Warmth you could hide until the smoke betrayed you. Officially, open flame near positions was a liability. Fire discipline mattered. You didn't advertise a trench with light or smell, and fuel was supposed to be centralized, issued, counted, and spent on kitchens, not on individual comforts. Chemical heat sources, where they existed, were treated like niche kit, not daily doctrine. Then the siege reality set the terms. A solid fuel tablet and a tiny folding stove weighed almost nothing, and that made it valuable. If British-style hexamine tablets or similar fuel blocks turned up in a pack or supply bundle, men used them like contraband medicine. A few minutes of heat for tea. A quick thaw for a bolt that had gone sticky. Fingers held over a cup, not over a fire. Some burned tablets inside a helmet or mess tin to focus the heat. Others built a windbreak from scrap sheet metal or even a ration tin to keep the flame low. When it worked, it kept you functional without leaving a bonfire signature. When it failed hard acrid fumes in a dugout, soot on hands and gear, and a thin ribbon of smell that could pull attention toward a position that wanted to stay invisible. Number 2. Emergency rations and tea, sugar blocks. Calories as discipline, calories as currency. Rations were supposed to be controlled, periodic, and predictable. Emergency packs were for emergencies, not for boredom, cold, or nightly routine. Tea and sugar, when issued, were meant to be prepared through unit kitchens, because centralized feeding kept order and reduced waste. In Leningrad's ring of ice and artillery, calories became decision-making. British emergency rations, if they appeared, were compact and designed to be carried. Hard biscuits, chocolate, concentrated foods. Exact contents varied by type and lot. Soviet troops already understood the logic, so they adapted fast. Sugar got broken into pocket-sized blocks and traded for repairs, tobacco, or a favor on a work detail. Tea was hoarded because it solved 2 problems at once: warmth in the hands and a reason to drink treated water. Men crumbled biscuits into hot water to make something like a thin porridge, because chewing in deep cold with cracked lips was its own punishment. Success looked like steady energy on sentry duty and fewer men collapsing on marches. Failure looked like theft, fights, and a private stash eaten early, leaving nothing when the real emergency arrived. Number 1. Insulated sleeping bags and blankets. You can't fight tomorrow if you can't thaw tonight. On paper, sleeping systems were standardized and allocated. Blankets, greatcoats, and issued bedding were tracked and redistributed by unit need. A sleeping bag, especially a foreign pattern insulated one, wasn't supposed to become personal property, and it definitely wasn't meant to be cut, traded, or improved in the field. But sleep in siege winter wasn't rest. It was repair. If a British-style insulated bag, or even just a heavier blanket, appeared through Lend-Lease or salvage, men treated it like life support. They nested systems: quilted jacket on, boots loosened, feet wrapped, then into the bag with extra cloth stuffed at the shoulders to stop drafts. Some sewed tie cords onto blankets to keep them from sliding off in cramped dugouts. Others lined the bag with a removable layer sackcloth, A spare shirt so sweat and grime didn't soak insulation that couldn't be properly dried. When it worked, you woke with feeling in your hands and enough clarity to follow orders. When it failed, damp insulation collapsed. Lice spread faster, and a warm bag turned into a heavy, freezing weight you still had to carry. Across all 7 hacks, the pattern isn't cleverness. It's friction between what a system can issue and what a body actually needs. In a winter siege, comfort becomes a resource, and rules become negotiable when they stop matching the physics of cold. If you want World War II history without simplification or mythology, subscribe. We'll keep following the small, unglamorous choices because that's where the real war keeps showing itself.